Business owners, if the end of the month keeps rolling in and you're struggling to pay all your bills, then this video is for you. T-O-O-N-E. So I challenged myself to create and run an ad campaign that would bring in new customers over 30 days using meta ads. And for some of you old school folks out there, those are Facebook ads. Here's the thing, cash flow is the blood that runs through your business's veins. Similar to the human body, without it, we can't do what we're supposed to do. If our bodies aren't carrying oxygen up to our brains and our muscle tissues, you can expect to be restless, you can expect to be fatigued, you can ultimately expect to pass out and maybe even die. This was the position I was in, and ultimately what led us to running with this challenge. We're going to be going through basically how I ended up severely in debt, the options I had to try and get out of it, and the thought process when looking at those options, and then ultimately how all of this played out. And be sure to stick around for the full video, because at the end of it, I'm going to be sharing that overarching lesson which will help you. Like, just skip over the stuff which probably won't work and right to the stuff which did for us or should work.
Like, y'all don't understand what a crazy year this has been.
When we started this video, I addressed it to business owners who are like up to their ears in bills and don't have enough money coming in. But if you're a new business owner, or like you're in the early stages, you're still starting up, then this is going to be super helpful for you too. And I hope it helps you avoid a ton of stress and a ton of sleepless nights. Here's how it started. I'm not going to waste too much time on this one. Effectively just a quick catch up. So the first thing we did was shoot the direct response offer for the permit packages, and then we moved some things around so that we could actually quickly get in the photo shoot. One of our models actually had to leave, so we accommodated with that. And now we're going to start doing the training. So some of the other services that 1126 provides is key and ECU training, which is effectively just these short courses where they help people gain these very specific niche skills, which then just generally help people who don't have abilities or ways for them to support themselves when they come here. There's generally a good foundational base for them and they can make pretty decent money. So that's gonna be dope. Super sick environment. I hope this looks aesthetic as fuck. My boys say this is crazy, so best believe. Yes sir, Toon Enterprises doing what we do. Back in 2023, we came out of just making like this massive hiring mistake, and really it just boiled down to the fact that like I brought on people and then I didn't give them the adequate support and training that they needed in order for them to do what they needed to do. So going into 2024, I vowed not to make the same mistake. The first thing we do is actually establish what roles do we need, and then I would just bring on the people who I already knew had the right expertise for the role they needed to fulfill for. But first, I'd actually need to identify what roles were actually required. So the plan was, okay, cool, we're gonna first actually get a client, then I'd fulfill for them on my own. And when I started getting burnt, then I'd start bringing in people to help manage those fires, which was a great idea. So the first step was to actually get social proof, and then we'd use that evidence in the selling process. And what this led to us doing was starting this 30-day challenge where we started building a personal brand.
Personal branding doesn't work.
Well, I'm gonna disprove that. Welcome
to day 1 of 30, where we're officially building the brand to market the business and show my clients why brand is worth the investment.
Getting a whole lot of attention, and then ultimately using all of that attention to get that client, which we did by day 27. Then after a bunch of meetings, bunch of back and forth, we finally came to an agreement, and then we're set to start at sometime beginning mid-August. And this is where I made the first mistake, right? A mistake in pricing. So when we were actually coming to an agreement around the pricing, we just used our standard pricing that we use for our marketing services. And I didn't probe too deep into everything that we actually needed to fulfill for this project, which was massive, because this was a mistake that cost me about $10,000 a month. And some months even a little more than that, sometimes a lot more than that. So I picked up pretty early how badly I'd messed up. But from my perspective, how I looked at it was, we're just paying for experience, right? Given Both of the brands that were a part of this project were massive, are massive in their industries respectively, and it would give us instant credibility to be like, hey, yeah, no, these are the brands that we work with, and it did. Fast forward to September 2024, and I was already starting to miss rent and car payments because I had to choose, right? Pay for my new business expenses, which included a whole lot of like auxiliary stuff, including the new team I put together, or pay for my living expenses and just have the business fall apart. The way I looked at it was, if I feed the business today, then it would feed me for the rest of my life. The flaw in that thinking is hard to live the rest of your life if you don't make it past today. This flaw became painfully obvious towards the end of September when it got to a point where I realized just how much things were falling apart, right? I was already constrained from a capacity point of view because I was already spending the majority of my days on my day job, and then I'd use whatever remaining hours I had to try and run the business with whatever little energy I had then. At this point, I knew I had to do something fast because my debt was just compounding in on itself. And it got to a point where effectively I couldn't do anything. I had a few options that I was tossing around, right? Option number one, respectfully bow out of a project which I clearly was not equipped to manage. 2, build additional income sources into the business that would require less manpower and less resources for us to actually manage, but would still generate cash flow. Or 3, bring in new customers, but at a lower level of operation, which meant we'd have to do less for them, which means it would cost less, and we could just use the money which we'd price for whatever that package was to then pay for some of our more expensive projects. Option 1 made sense in that we'd stop the bleeding and could start the recovery process as soon as possible so that we then equip ourselves to then better handle this the next time it would come around. The problem was that, like I said, this was a really big project and I had a really close relationship with my team, so it just didn't seem feasible to actually run down that path, right? The second option was the most feasible in that we create a lead magnet which would then double as another source of income, which should run passively before the upsell, right? The problem was it would require a lot of upfront work for a number of months if we did it correctly, because we need to do a bunch of market research, test it with our markets, etc., etc., etc. And all of that was work which effectively kind of shied away from. Not kind of, I straight up shied away from. What this meant is ultimately we'd have a source of income which, by my conservative estimations, would far surpass what we were actually able to currently generate with actively working with our clients. Yes, if done right, the lead magnet, by far the best option. And when I say right, I mean, like I say, going through the full product life cycle, right? Testing it with these markets and doing all of those things. But this would be a new domain for me. We've made a lead magnet in the past, but the problem was back then we just made it anticipating what the market would need without actually going to the market and then being like, hey, do you need this, right? So it wasn't something we were willing to explore then. The third option made the least sense, but it was the easiest to do because it's literally what we do already. What would then be required is just we market the way we've been marketing, we sell the way we've been selling, but the only difference is the words we use wouldn't be our full package, it would be something limited, right? But then at that point, we'd then get those customers, and like I said, we'd then use the profits from that to then pay for other expenses. It was the easiest one to run with and the one that we were familiar with. That's the option we went with. Big mistake. We ran an ad campaign towards the beginning of October where we offered 3 businesses the chance to work with us under a very limited package. And what we'd effectively do with that was, it was a chance for them to get to see what it's like to work with us if they were interested to carry on the package. But from our perspective, it would also help us use that experience to then further market ourselves and further just prove that we can do what we say we can do. So we managed to generate a couple of hundred leads by the time the whole campaign was over, and ultimately ended up closing 2 deals. The biggest problem in how we actually took on this approach was effectively that we sold at a price for limited services, but ultimately had to fulfill pretty much full services. And that's how the first deal actually ended up falling apart, because we got to a point where I realized that we were doing so much that it was costing me way more than I'd already got, right? To give you an example, we shot a couple of ads for them on day one, and then we came back again on the next day because there was still more that we had to shoot. And when we went back to the edit, we realized that the first run that we did, we may not have picked the right representative to actually talk about the brand. So we went back again with more people that I had to still pay. And we reshot the ads again. And I was still getting a ton of pressure from the client to actually like deliver within the same time frame. And the whole thing just ended up becoming this big ball of fuck, right? And that's when I made the decision, look, I had to pull out of that one. With the second deal, I ended up using the full contract value from the contract plus money out of my pocket just on flights and accommodation to the client. But this time around, I decided to look at it more as a bit of a longer term investment. We'd do good work for the client, deliver them great results, and then using that as leverage, we'd then get something on the back end at a much higher price, obviously, and we'd use the profits from that to recoup the losses from the initial trial period. That was the plan. So that plan looked amazing on paper. So I flew down to Cape Town. I couldn't afford to bring a cinematographer with me, so I had to roll solo on this project. And effectively, once I got down there, we shot a number of content pieces. Pretty much I landed at 12 p.m. Got to the client by 1 p.m. We shot all the way until like 10 p.m. that night, went back to my hotel room, came back the next morning again at about 7, 8. We shot the whole way until like 4, and then I had to rush for my plane, which I almost missed. But effectively, once we got back, then I also had to make sure again that I wasn't going to expend too many resources on this project, right? There wasn't a lot of back and forth that we could do, and that actually created a little bit of friction because it meant our turnaround time then also became a bit longer. And damn. Once again, by the time we actually started doing the work, there was a substantial amount of scope creep, again, caused by me and my ineffective communication during the sales process. So much regret. But what I had to do, like I just said, I had to manage how deep we were going into the red zone, because all of these projects they cost way more to actually run than I initially anticipated, which seems to be a trend with me. But by the time we got to the end of this campaign, we were still creating more pieces of content while we're in talks about what's the way forward. And ultimately, as a whole, right, there were 3 main big takeaways that I realized while doing this, that if I include them into the business, will make my life a whole lot easier. Number 1, while we make great content that cannot be disputed, ask anyone we've ever worked with, our problem was we were bottlenecked in that we only have one dedicated editor. And while I can edit, a lot of the time I get pulled away with other aspects of the business. I either need to put together a report, I need to put together a plan for what we're going to do on the next campaign, or I need to just sit in meetings and review a whole lot of stuff, right? So I'm not spending a lot of time editing. Number 2 was this thing I keep highlighting, this communication. But not even just what we were communicating, but also the communication cadence, right? Like I said, it sounds like an excuse, and it probably is, but I get pulled away a lot, which means a lot of the time what can end up happening is I might be well-meaning and that I'm gonna send you that update, or there's something we need to talk about, but I ultimately don't get around to it. And sometimes the client ends up coming back to me first, which is horrible. We don't internally, we don't want that. It must almost be that the client is over inundated with information. They must feel like we talk to them too much. They must feel like they know everything that's happening up to the second. And the moment we know that a client is coming to us to ask, hey guys, what's going on with this thing, then that's a mess up. And I take that L on any given day. But that was the second component that I knew I had to fix. And that remedy was just finding someone whose core responsibility would just be to manage communication. Thirdly and lastly, I realized that I need an account manager. I need someone whose sole responsibility is just being dedicated to monitoring and anticipating the needs of a project, so that when things do come up, we're a lot more proactive than reactive, which is currently how we've been running. which is just unsustainable because it creates stress on the client, it creates stress on my team, and then it creates stress on me. So kill that by just putting an account manager into it. All of these would obviously be additional expenses when it comes down to fulfillment, and would only keep our issue going, the current issue where it's just cash flow doesn't match expenses. So when I got to the end of this project and I reflected and I realized that really the only feasible options were 1 and 2. And on a much longer time horizon, 2 was really the one that we were supposed to go with. Because as soon as we built that lead magnet in once, it would just continue to generate income. And if anything, it just build us bigger and bigger and bigger. And on the active side, as we started to get more results for more clients, we'd be able to push that price point up so that we could ultimately and effectively start providing the real kind of value that we want to our clients. The second client I mentioned, he had such a great analogy when he was actually talking to me and describing this entire experience. And excuse the arrogance, but these are his words, paraphrasing. We're currently a Lamborghini factory that's producing Toyotas. And what that effectively means is our ambitions are lofty and our potential is great, but we're still at a point where our resources only allow us to create that level of work, which means I do need to build in all of these additional systems. I do need to make sure that our price point is at a place where we can do all the things that we want to do, and only time and focus is going to do that. So what that means is we need to fix that lead magnet. 2025 is no to distractions, no to things that aren't helping us build that, and just no to anything which isn't going to take us to where we need to go, right? And I know it's all easy said and done right now, but if someone comes to me tomorrow and says, hey man, I need you to run this project for us, and then they say an amount, I'm probably going to be tempted to take it because I might want that money in that moment. But that's why we need to do this right now. That's why we need to make sure that we're dedicating ourselves and dedicating the entire business focus to the one thing which is going to fix all of the other things down the line so we can have a much easier time dealing with it all. So I hope this is helpful. And if you do want to hear from some of my other mistakes that I've made, specifically 7 of my biggest mistakes that I made while I was actually building the business, then check out the video here. Anyway, I hope to see you guys on the other side. TWN, the one and only Nigel, CEO and founder of Toon Enterprises, a digital marketing agency that helps business owners build bigger, better, faster. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. I'm out. Peace.